At a luxury dinner, my husband, his mother, and his sister publicly insulted my mother. But none of us expected the strong voice that finally shut them down. Stay with me while I share my story, and if it touches your heart, don't forget to show some love by liking, sharing, and supporting our channel. My name is Kira Monroe. I'm in my early 30s, and for as long as I can remember, my mother Lorraine has been my entire world. She raised me on her own, working long hours, sometimes 2 jobs, just to keep food on the table and make sure I had a shot at a better life. We didn't grow up with wealth or fancy things, but she gave me something much more valuable: love, dignity, and the courage to dream. A few years ago, I met Malcolm Price. He came from money, the kind of family that dines in country clubs and wears names I couldn't afford to whisper. Still, he seemed different when we first met. He was charming, ambitious, and I believed he saw me, not my background, not my lack of a famous last name, just me. Against all odds, we fell in love. I thought our love would be strong enough to bridge the gap between his world and mine. When Malcolm asked me to marry him, I said yes without hesitation. My mother was happy for me, though I could see the worry in her eyes. She knew that some families guard their wealth and status like a crown, and she feared I might never truly be accepted. I brushed her worries aside, believing my marriage would prove her wrong. But after the wedding, I began to notice things I had ignored before. Malcolm's mother, Evelyn, and his sister, Tasha, never missed an opportunity to remind me that I didn't belong. Their comments were sharp, wrapped in polite smiles, but filled with poison. At family gatherings, Evelyn would make remarks about how Malcolm had married down. Tasha would smirk, whispering things just loud enough for me to hear. Malcolm never confronted them. He would sit quietly, sipping his wine or changing the subject. Sometimes he would squeeze my hand under the table, as if that small gesture could erase the sting of their words. I told myself he was keeping the peace, but deep down, I began to feel isolated. His silence spoke louder than their insults. Still, I held on, hoping that with time things would improve. So when the Prices invited my mother to a luxury dinner at the Regency Club, I wanted to believe it was a chance for a fresh start. Maybe, just maybe, they would see the woman who had worked so hard to raise me, the woman who deserved respect. I prayed the evening would be different. I prayed my husband's family would finally put aside their pride and welcome my mother with open arms. But in my heart, I knew the storm was already brewing. That dinner would test everything: my marriage, my loyalty, and the strength my mother had built in me all my life. Malcolm Price came from a family that lived for appearances. His mother, Evelyn, carried herself like royalty, always dressed in expensive silk blouses and diamonds that sparkled in every room she entered. She spoke with a calm, polished voice, but every word carried a hidden sting. She cared about money, power, and reputation more than anything else. To her, people were either of her class or beneath her. Unfortunately, in her eyes, I was beneath her. His sister, Tasha, was no different. Spoiled since childhood, she had grown up with everything handed to her and believed the world owed her respect. She was quick with sharp remarks, never missing a chance to remind me of the differences between us. She envied me too, though she would never admit it. Tasha often said things in a sweet tone that sounded harmless to others, but I always caught the bite behind her words. From the beginning, Evelyn and Tasha made it clear they didn't approve of me. At first, it was subtle. Evelyn would compliment my dress only to add that it looked affordable and simple. Tasha would laugh at stories from my childhood, calling them cute little tales from the other side of town. Over time, their remarks became sharper, no longer hidden under polite smiles. What hurt the most wasn't even their cruelty. It was Malcolm's silence. Whenever they mocked me, he would lower his eyes, tap his glass, or excuse himself from the conversation. He didn't defend me. He didn't protect me. His loyalty seemed to lean toward his mother and sister, as if keeping their approval mattered more than protecting his wife's dignity. I told myself he was avoiding conflict, but that excuse began to wear thin. The weight of being the outsider in my own marriage grew heavier with each visit. I loved Malcolm, but love began to feel lonely when I stood in rooms where everyone looked down on me. Sometimes I'd go home and cry quietly, so my mother wouldn't see. Lorraine had sacrificed her whole life to give me a chance at happiness, and I couldn't bear the thought of her knowing how I was being treated. Then one day, Evelyn extended an invitation for my mother to join us at dinner. She framed it as a gesture of kindness, but I knew Evelyn well enough to doubt her motives. Still, part of me hoped this could be a turning point. Maybe if she met my mother face to face, she would finally recognize the strength and dignity in her. Maybe she would see that Lorraine was not a woman to be mocked, but respected. I held on to that small hope with all my heart. As the evening approached, I prayed for peace, prayed that my husband's family would put aside their pride for just one night. I wanted my mother to feel welcomed, not ridiculed. I wanted her to see me standing tall in my marriage. Little did I know that dinner would only deepen the cracks already forming in my world. The Regency Club was one of those places people whispered about, but rarely entered. It was polished, grand, and filled with chandeliers that sparkled as though the entire ceiling were made of stars. The men wore tailored suits. The women were draped in gowns that looked like they had been pulled straight from glossy magazines. Waiters moved gracefully between tables, balancing silver trays with crystal glasses and meals that looked like art. Walking in with my mother at my side, I felt eyes turn toward us. Lorraine Monroe was dressed in her best, a navy blue dress she had carefully ironed, simple pearl earrings she had worn for years, and shoes that had walked through too many long days of work. She looked beautiful to me, but I knew this crowd would not see her the way I did. They would see the absence of designer labels, the lack of polished wealth, the simplicity that came from a life of sacrifice. Evelyn was already seated when we arrived, her posture perfect, her smile sharp. She stood to greet us, eyes scanning my mother from head to toe before curling into a smug grin. "Lorraine," she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Such a charming dress. So refreshing to see something so simple in a place like this." Her words hung in the air like perfume, sweet to some, poisonous to others. I felt my mother stiffen beside me. She gave a polite smile, answering softly, "Thank you, Evelyn. Comfort has always been my style." She spoke with grace, but I could feel her hurt in the way she tightened her hand around her clutch bag. Tasha leaned back in her chair, smirking as she muttered under her breath, "Simple is one word for it." She laughed softly, as though sharing a private joke with herself. I heard it clearly, though, and so did Malcolm. Instead of stopping her, my husband chuckled nervously, brushing it off as though silence could erase disrespect. My chest burned with anger, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wanted this dinner to go smoothly, for my mother's sake. She had worked too hard and endured too much for me to let them tear her apart in public. I placed my hand over hers, giving her a reassuring squeeze as we sat down. The waiter poured wine into Evelyn's glass, and she lifted it with a smirk, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "To family," she said, her eyes lingering on my mother just long enough to twist the word into something cruel. Tasha snickered again, whispering something I couldn't catch. I smiled tightly, though inside, I wanted to scream. Every part of me longed to defend my mother, to demand respect. But I swallowed it down, telling myself to wait. One wrong move could turn this dinner into a scene, and I wasn't ready to give Evelyn and Tasha the satisfaction. For now, I stayed quiet, protective, and determined not to let their cruelty break the woman who had built me from love and strength. The evening carried on with the quiet hum of laughter and clinking glasses from nearby tables, but at ours, the air grew heavier with every passing moment. My mother sat gracefully, her hands folded neatly on her lap, listening more than she spoke. She carried herself with the quiet dignity she had always taught me to value. But Evelyn and Tasha seemed determined to chip away at that dignity one cruel word at a time. Evelyn set down her glass of wine and leaned slightly forward, her eyes fixed on my mother. Her smile was polite, but her tone carried a sharpness that cut deep. "You know, Lorraine," she said smoothly, "some women raise children, but not women of refinement. It's one thing to get by, but quite another to prepare a daughter for a life among people of higher standards." The words stung like an open slap. My mother's face remained calm, her lips curving into the faintest of smiles, but I could see the flicker in her eyes. That quiet flicker of hurt she tried so hard to hide. Before I could even form a response, Tasha leaned forward, her voice dripping with mockery. Honestly, maybe if Kira had grown up in a real home, she'd have better manners by now. She let out a sharp laugh, glancing at her mother as though waiting for approval. The cruelty hit me harder than I expected. I clenched my fork so tightly my hand ached. My mother lowered her gaze for just a moment, then lifted it again, her shoulders straight. She didn't defend herself, didn't trade insults, didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. But I saw it, the pain behind her eyes, the quiet ache that she would never voice out loud. I turned to Malcolm, desperate for him to say something, anything at all. But he only swirled his wine in the glass, his eyes fixed on the dark red liquid, as though it could distract him from the scene unfolding in front of us. His silence screamed louder than their words. He acted as though their insults meant nothing, as though my mother's humiliation was not worth his attention. My chest tightened, and anger burned hot through my veins. I wanted to stand up, to shout, to make everyone in that glittering restaurant hear the truth about the two women tearing at my mother's soul. But I stayed frozen, caught between rage and heartbreak, my jaw locked to keep from trembling. My mother, Lorraine, simply lifted her glass of water and took a slow sip. She didn't flinch, didn't fire back, but the quiet sadness in her expression spoke volumes. Her grace shone even brighter in the face of cruelty, and that only deepened my fury. Watching her dignity be stripped away piece by piece broke something inside me. At that moment, I realized I could no longer stay silent. The woman who had given me everything was being disrespected, and the man I had married had chosen cowardice over courage. The fire inside me was building, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it erupted. Evelyn lifted her glass again, the diamond on her finger catching the candlelight as though it had something important to say on its own. Her eyes settled on me this time, sharp and deliberate. "Kira," she began smoothly, "your little career is admirable, I suppose. But really it's more like charity work, isn't it? Something to keep you busy rather than something that truly matters." Her voice carried across the table, and though her tone was calm, the insult beneath it was clear. My chest tightened as heat rushed to my face. I had worked tirelessly to build my career, pouring long hours into something meaningful to me. To have it dismissed so casually, as though it were a hobby for the less fortunate, made my stomach twist. Tasha didn't hold back. She threw her head back and laughed loudly, the kind of laugh that wasn't born from humor but from the joy of cruelty. A few heads from nearby tables turned toward us, curious about the noise. Tasha leaned forward with a smirk, her voice mocking. "Honestly, it's cute you even call it a career. I mean, we all need projects to pass the time, right?" I felt my mother's hand brush mine under the table as she tried to step in, her voice soft and steady. "Why don't we talk about something else?" she suggested, her smile gentle, her eyes pleading to steer the conversation away from more cruelty. But Evelyn and Tasha were relentless. They ignored her attempt to change the subject, circling back to their mocking comments as if they hadn't heard her at all. Evelyn tilted her head, her lips curling into another cold smile. "Of course, Lorraine. You've always been good at changing the subject." It was too much. The anger inside me boiled over, and I couldn't sit there another second while they tore at the woman who had given me everything. My voice rose before I could stop it. "Enough," I said, the word sharp and firm. "You've both sat here insulting my mother as if she isn't worth respect. But she is. More than either of you could ever understand. She raised me with strength and dignity, two things money can't buy." Tasha's smile faltered, and Evelyn's eyes narrowed. The table fell silent for a heartbeat, the tension hanging in the air like smoke. My mother's hand tightened on mine as though trying to calm me, but I couldn't let it go this time. Under the table, I felt Malcolm's hand slide over mine. He squeezed gently, his voice low, almost pleading. "Don't make a scene," he whispered, his eyes darting nervously around the room. That moment shattered something inside me. I realized he wasn't worried about me, or my mother, or the pain carved into this dinner. He was worried about appearances, about how it looked, about keeping the fragile image of his family intact, even at the cost of my dignity and my mother's pride. And that truth cut deeper than any insult his mother or sister had spoken. Evelyn's lips curled as she prepared to launch into another insult, her voice sharp with venom. Tasha leaned in close to her, whispering something that made them both smirk. I could see the words forming, another attack ready to cut into my mother. My heart pounded in my chest, my jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. I was seconds away from exploding when, suddenly, another voice cut through the air. "Enough!" It was deep, steady, and commanding. The kind of voice that could silence a crowd without needing to shout. We all turned toward it, and standing just a few steps away was Mr. Donovan, the owner of the Regency Club. Everyone in the city knew his name. He was respected, admired, and feared all at once. His presence carried weight, and now every pair of eyes in the dining room turned to our table. Mr. Donovan stepped closer, his gaze sweeping over Evelyn and Tasha before settling on my mother. "I will not tolerate disrespect in my establishment," he said firmly, his voice echoing through the hushed room. "This is a place of dignity, and every guest deserves to be treated as such." Evelyn's smirk faltered. Tasha shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her cheeks flushing red. For once, Their confidence cracked under the weight of someone else's authority. Then Mr. Donovan turned fully toward my mother, his expression softening. "Any woman who raised a daughter like Kira deserves respect," he said clearly, his words carrying across the room. "Respect for her strength, her sacrifice, and her grace. And I will not stand by while anyone tries to diminish that." The dining room fell silent. The clinking of glasses, the quiet chatter, even the music from the corner. All of it seemed to fade as people stared at our table. I saw heads turning, whispers starting, eyes locking onto Evelyn and Tasha, who now looked small and cornered in their expensive gowns. My mother's eyes widened slightly, her lips parting in surprise. She didn't speak right away, but I saw something in her expression shift. The hurt that had been building all night seemed to ease, replaced by a quiet strength that had always been there, waiting to be recognized. I felt tears sting the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them back. For the first time that evening, I didn't feel powerless. Someone had spoken the words I had been too afraid to shout. Someone had reminded the world of my mother's worth. Evelyn fumbled with her napkin, her face pale, while Tasha pressed her lips together, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The humiliation was written all over them, and for once, they had no sharp remark to throw back. I glanced at Malcolm, waiting, hoping, for him to finally say something. But he just sat frozen, staring down at his untouched plate. Shame flickered across his face, but not enough to make him move. His silence screamed louder than ever. And yet, despite his silence, I felt something inside me shift. For the first time that night, I didn't feel small. I felt vindicated. My mother had been defended, not by my husband, but by a stranger with the courage he lacked. My mother sat a little straighter in her chair, the soft glow from the chandelier catching the silver strands in her hair. For a moment, she looked stunned by Mr. Donovan's words, but then she gave him a warm, grateful smile. "Thank you, sir," she said softly, her voice carrying just enough to be heard. "But I can speak for myself." The room grew quiet again, every diner watching, waiting to see what she would say. My heart pounded, afraid and proud all at once. My mother took a slow breath and lifted her chin, her voice calm, steady, but filled with strength. "I have lived my whole life working with my hands," she began. "I did not have diamonds or gowns or a family name that opened doors. What I had was my daughter. I raised Kira on my own, through nights when I had no idea how we would pay rent, through mornings when I left for work before the sun was up. I sacrificed, yes, but never once did I see it as a burden. I saw it as love, because raising her was the greatest honor of my life." Her words wrapped around me like a shield. I felt my throat tighten as I looked at her, the woman who had carried me through storms and still stood tall in this glittering, hostile room. She continued, her tone unwavering. "Respect is not measured by money or refinement. Respect is earned by how you treat others, by the kindness and dignity you show, even when no one is watching. If that makes me simple in some eyes, then I will gladly remain simple. But let it be known, I raised a daughter who knows her worth. And that, to me, is wealth enough." The room stayed silent for a heartbeat, then soft claps began from a nearby table. Another diner joined in, then another, until the sound rippled quietly through the restaurant. It wasn't loud applause, but it was steady and real. My mother's words had reached them, even if the prices refused to acknowledge it. Evelyn leaned back, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Overreacting," she muttered under her breath, though the strain in her voice betrayed her. Tasha rolled her eyes dramatically, as if dismissing my mother's speech could erase the power of her words. I turned my gaze to Malcolm. He hadn't looked up once. His eyes stayed fixed on his plate, his fork idly pushing food around as if he could disappear into it. Shame flickered on his face, but he still didn't move, didn't speak, didn't dare to stand up for me or my mother. And in that moment, the truth settled deep into my chest. My mother had more courage in a single breath than my husband and his family carried in their entire lives. She had stood tall, spoken her truth, and reminded the world what dignity truly looked like. And as proud as I was of her, I also knew something inside me had begun to break. The clinking of silverware had barely settled when Evelyn stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the polished floor. "I think we've had enough for tonight," she announced, her tone sharp and clipped. Tasha followed suit, muttering something under her breath, while Malcolm rose silently, his face dark with irritation. The dinner had ended not with dessert, not with laughter, but with an air so heavy it suffocated. We walked out together, but it didn't feel like together. My mother walked beside me, her head held high despite the daggers Evelyn's glares kept throwing her way. Guests watched us leave, their eyes filled with curiosity and quiet judgment. The Prices were embarrassed, and somehow, I knew the blame was already being carved out for me. The car ride was silent at first, the hum of the engine the only sound filling the space. I stared out of the tinted window, my hand brushing against my mother's for comfort. Then Malcolm's voice sliced through the quiet. "You embarrass my family tonight." The words were low, but sharp enough to cut. I turned to him, stunned. "I embarrassed them?" "Malcolm, they insulted my mother in front of a room full of strangers. She defended herself with grace, and somehow I'm the one at fault." His jaw clenched as he gripped the steering wheel tighter. "You could have kept it calm. My mother and sister were uncomfortable, and instead of easing the situation, you let it spiral. Do you know how that makes us look?" I blinked, unable to believe what I was hearing. He hadn't heard Evelyn's cruel remarks. He hadn't seen Tasha's sneer. Or worse, he had, and simply didn't care. My throat felt dry as I whispered, "Us? Or them?" From the back seat, my mother's hand rested on mine. Her voice, gentle but firm, filled the silence Malcolm left hanging. "Kira," she said softly, "you don't have to stay where you're not respected." Her words pierced deeper than Malcolm's accusations. My chest tightened, and I fought to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. Betrayal stung every nerve in my body, not just because Malcolm had failed to defend me, but because he had chosen them, again and again, over me. Over us. The rest of the ride passed in a blur. I stared at the passing streetlights, each one flickering like a reminder of the cracks in my marriage. My mind churned with questions I didn't want to face, but the answers were already forming. This wasn't just a bad night. It wasn't just a fight. It was a truth I could no longer ignore. My marriage was crumbling. And Malcolm, the man who had vowed to protect and cherish me, was the one pushing the pieces apart. By the time we reached home, I knew nothing between us would ever feel the same again. The house was quiet when we stepped inside, the kind of silence that pressed against the walls, heavy and suffocating. I set my purse on the table and turned to Malcolm, my heart thundering in my chest. My mother disappeared into the guest room, giving us space, though I could feel her presence, steady, strong, just beyond the door. "Malcolm," I began, my voice shaking but steady enough. "You never defended me. Not once. Tonight, or any other time they've insulted me or my mother. You sat there, watching, pretending it was nothing." He loosened his tie, avoiding my eyes. "Kira, you're exaggerating. They didn't mean it the way you think. You need to understand my family. They're particular, yes, but they don't hate you." "Don't hate me?" I repeated, the words catching in my throat. "They demeaned my mother in front of a restaurant full of strangers. They've made me feel small in every room I've walked into since the day I married you. And you," I swallowed hard, fighting the tears. "You sat in silence, as if their cruelty was something I should accept." He finally looked at me, frustration etched into his face. "It's not that simple, Kira. Family dynamics, they're complicated. You should have just let it go. Why create drama?" The words shattered something inside me. I had bent myself over backward for this man, trying to fit into a family that refused to see me, and now he called my pain drama. I shook my head slowly, tears slipping down my cheeks. "I can't do this anymore," I whispered. "I can't live in a marriage built on silence and disrespect. Not for me, and not for my mother, who deserves so much more than tonight." He blinked, taken aback, his expression slipping into panic. "Kira, don't be ridiculous. You're upset. Let's talk about this tomorrow." But my resolve was already carved in stone. I turned and walked to the bedroom, pulling out a suitcase. My hands trembled as I folded clothes, but I kept moving. Each item packed a declaration of the choice I was making. My mother appeared in the doorway, her face calm but her eyes glistening with quiet pride. Without a word, she joined me, helping me fold, helping me leave. Behind us, Malcolm's voice cracked. "Kira, wait. You're not serious. You can't just walk away over one dinner." I paused, looking at him one last time. "It wasn't one dinner, Malcolm. It was every moment you chose them over me. Every time you let silence be your answer. And tonight, I realized, your silence is louder than anything they've ever said." He stood frozen, unable to move, unable to process that his passivity had cost him everything. Zipping the suitcase shut, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time, I was choosing myself. For the first time, I was choosing my mother over appearances. And for the first time, I felt free. The days after I left were a blur of paperwork, tears, and an odd sense of relief. I filed for divorce, my hands trembling as I signed the forms, but my heart was steady. I was done living in silence. I was done being disrespected. I promised myself that I would never again shrink to fit into someone else's version of love. Malcolm called a few times in the beginning, his voice desperate, asking me to reconsider. But every time I remembered the look on my mother's face at that dinner, the humiliation she endured while he swirled his wine and kept quiet, my resolve grew stronger. I didn't answer anymore. Word of that night spread quickly through the Price's social circle. Whispers traveled faster than wildfire. People who had once envied Evelyn's flawless composure now shook their heads at her cruelty. Tasha's sharp tongue, once excused as youthful sass, was finally seen for what it was, jealous bitterness. Invitations to events dried up, and their polished reputation began to crack under the weight of their own behavior. The very society they worshipped now looked at them with pity and disdain. Meanwhile, my life took a different turn. Free from their shadow, I poured myself into my work. Projects I had once hesitated to take on now came alive under my leadership. My career blossomed, not because of the Price name, but because of my own talent and persistence. For the first time, people saw me, not as Malcolm's wife, not as Evelyn's target, but as Kira Monroe, a woman who had built her own place in the world. Through it all, my mother was by my side. Lorraine reminded me daily of my worth, her quiet strength guiding me like a compass. We shared late-night talks, laughter over simple meals, and silent moments of comfort. The bond we had always shared only deepened, becoming unshakable. I realized that in choosing myself, I had also chosen her, the one person who had never failed me. The Prices, once untouchable, became cautionary tales. People whispered in hushed tones about how Evelyn and Tasha had gone too far, about how arrogance had turned into public shame. The irony wasn't lost on me. The dinner they had orchestrated to humiliate my mother had become the very moment that stripped them of their power. And as for me, I didn't end my story in bitterness. I refused to let their cruelty define me. Instead, I carried myself with quiet triumph. I had walked away, stronger than they ever expected, and I had proven something they could never take from me. True class isn't about money or social standing. It's about dignity, respect, and the way you treat others. In the end, it wasn't Evelyn or Tasha who stood tall. It wasn't Malcolm, hiding behind silence. It was Lorraine. It was me, the women they tried to break. And the world finally saw who truly had class. Do you believe Kira made the right choice by leaving a marriage built on silence? Or should she have given Malcolm another chance to change? Share your thoughts with me in the comments. I'd really love to hear them. And if you enjoy powerful stories like this, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one.